Good evening. We collectively acknowledge that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic indigenous communities in Michigan, for indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. Good evening and welcome to this evening of poetry with Laura Apol. I'm Laurie Hollinger, the acting director of the RCAH Center for Poetry. Before we get rolling, I'd like to thank the interim dean of the Residential College in the Arts and Humanities, Glenn Chambers, for his support of tonight's program. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to Madge Bice in the sound booth for her technical assistance tonight, and to Steve Byback, preparator of the Lookout Gallery, for preparing and opening the space for our events and the reception thereafter tonight. Thank you as well to our stellar staff of student interns, Julius Pato, Maddie Stark, Dominic Stoops, and Joe Troxel for their work in promoting, planning, and carrying out tonight's events. A warm thanks and welcome as well to Scott Harris of Everybody Reads for being on hand this evening offering Laura's books for sale. We hope you'll join us upstairs in the Lookout Gallery for a reception and a book signing immediately following this reading. I do have a couple of very brief announcements about a couple of upcoming events. Very brief. This Friday is one of my favorite events, Live Lit, which features the winners of the Creative Writing Awards this year, as well as many of the finalists for the Balocating Prize, which the winner of which will be announced very shortly. Also coming up, next Thursday, April 11th, at the MSU Museum, Detroit poet and collab coordinator Natasha T. Miller of the MSU Museum is presenting the annual poetry slam this year called Food Fight. That is Thursday night from 7 to 8:30 at the MSU Museum. And finally, if you would save the date for Tuesday, April 23rd, on that evening, there will be a passing of the laurels ceremony at the Robin Theater in Lansing. We don't know yet to whom those laurels will be passed, but it will be a night celebrating the Lansing Poet Laureate, both present and future. So I hope you'll join us for all of those things. So tonight I'm going to open with the announcement of the 2024 Balocating Undergraduate Prize for Poetry winner. This prize is named for Annie Balocating and was established in 2011 to award $500 for a single poem written by an MSU undergraduate in any major. Annie Balocating was a student in the residential option in Arts and Letters, also known as Royal, a 2-year residential program that is now viewed as a precursor to our own residential college in the Arts and Humanities, which the rest of this evening you'll hear as ARCA from me, at least. As Center for Poetry founding director Anita Skeen, who also directed the Royal program, recalls, everyone liked Annie for her infectious warmth and smile, her creativity, her sense of responsibility. She became the archivist for the Royal program, keeping a scrapbook every year of the activities that the students engaged in. The poems and stories they wrote, the places they traveled. Among her talents was a keen interest in language. She was a Russian major for a while, later becoming an English major. She was also a fine young poet and was invited to join a monthly poetry group that included several of the poets in the area, including Anita, Laura Apol, and retired English professor Diane Wachowski, among others. Annie was the only student in the group and always came with an interesting poem to workshop and offered good feedback on everyone else's poems. Annie eventually moved away from poetry and into working on issues of social justice, even spending time in Rwanda in the years of the genocide. We remember Annie with this prize tonight, not only because of her talents with language and her work on important social issues, but because when Annie heard that the RCAH Center for Poetry had been established, she was the first person to contact Anita, and she offered a $500 donation to help get it underway. At the time, she and her husband, Jeremy Couillard, another former Royal student, were living in New York City, where Jeremy was teaching Spanish in a high school, and Annie was a graduate student at the New School for Social Research. They didn't have much money, but they wanted to share what they had with a cause they believed in, promoting poetry at MSU, in the Lansing area, and beyond. Tonight and every year, we honor Annie's vivacious, creative, and altruistic life with the Annie Balocating Prize for Poetry, keeping alive both her memory and the encouragement of young writers at Michigan State University. This year's Balocating Prize garnered 83 entries from 33 MSU undergraduates in majors that ranged from actuarial science and advertising to creative writing, geoscience, integrative sciences, humanities, and theater. Entries were winnowed down to 10 finalist poems, and then they were sent along to the final judge, Gabrielle Cavalcaresi. It's my honor tonight to present the 2024 Balocating Undergraduate Prize for Poetry to Julia Rudloff for their poem, In May. Final judge Gabrielle Cavalcaresi had this to say about the winning poem. With its formal rigor and endlessly surprising imagery and detail, In May takes the body's relentless journey towards oblivion and makes a love poem, an elegy, a cartography of poetic possibility. I want to read more poems by this poet, a whole lifetime of them. Congratulations, Julia. Are you here? Yeah. All right. Come on down. Julia, could you come down? We'd love to hear this poem. I happen to have a copy of it right here if you need. Congratulations. You're welcome. And there's your.
Thank you.
There's your suitable for framing certificate.
Thank you.
All right.
So this is called In May. When I see the skeleton of a deer or fox decorating the forest floor, I remember how I used to, how I sometimes still wish that body was mine. I hesitate calling it a body. What makes a body more than bones? Is it blood, meat, a conscience? Who knows? I know it's been a long winter. I see myself emerge, becoming more bone than blood. I remember falling, decaying in February, refreezing in April. I wonder, when the snow melts from my veins, if the rivers within me will continue to run, or if I'll wake up carved apart, pelvis under pile of leaves, skull propped up on a tree, spine dangling, turned into jewelry for an artist's neck. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and congratulations once again. Friends, you can hear Julia and many of the Balocating finalists, as well as I said earlier, she said, looking at her notes, at Live Lit this Friday at 3 p.m. in Wells Hall. There is detailed information on that and the other upcoming events on the table in the back. So, friends, tonight's poet is no stranger to most of us here. Laura Apol is an internationally published poet, a writer and an associate professor in the College of Education here at MSU, where she teaches creative writing and children's and young adult literature. Laura has published widely in the areas of literacy education, children's and young adult literature, the teaching of poetry, and arts-based research methodologies. She's the author of several prize-winning collections of poetry, including A Fine Yellow Dust from MSU Press in 2021, Nothing But the Blood from 2018, which won the Oklahoma Book Award for Poetry, was a silver medal winner of the Independent Publisher Book Award, and winner of the annual Midwest Book Award. Her latest collection, Cauterized, was released by MSU Press in January of this year. Laura's conducted writing for healing workshops in a number of national and international contexts, and her 2021 publication, Poetry, Poetic Inquiry, and Rwanda, Engaging with the Lives of Others, published by Springer International, focuses on arts-based inquiry, international collaboration, and the therapeutic uses of writing in response to trauma. From 2019 to 2021, Laura served as Lansing Poet Laureate, and she continues to do readings and workshops for writers of all ages and levels of experience. Laura's term as Lansing Poet Laureate was altered by the pandemic in early 2020, but that didn't stop her from promoting poetry. In many ways, it was almost fortuitous that Laura was the laureate at that time. Her experience with facilitating writing in response to trauma seems ideally suited, and as life moved online, Laura launched National Poetry Month by posting a series of videos of poems read by local poets and helping us all to feel a little more connected. She continued offering writing retreats at home until we began returning to school and work, and as you'll hear tonight as we celebrate her latest title, continued writing her own way through the isolation of the pandemic, as well as her own grief and contemplation of life's loves and losses. About Cauterized, Thomas Lynch writes, "The spirits that hover over and through these poems become entirely incarnate at the poet's beckoning. The shades, of course, come freighted with questions. There are good ghosts, umbrae of their former or imagined lives, with which the poet seems eager to reconnect. Accordingly, the work traffics in the essential rather than accessory dynamics of love and grief, faith and its feelings, a brave endeavor to bring such things to light." Friends, please help me welcome Laura Apol.
Laurie, thanks for that introduction. It's not as scary as I thought it would be up here because I can't see anything. So basically, I'm just here all by myself. I practiced reading to my dog this afternoon, and this is not all that different, I guess. So I have a long history with the Center for Poetry, and it's such a gift to be here again. And to be celebrating the beginning of National Poetry Month with you all. I'm really honored. Julia, congratulations. I'm honored to share the stage with such a wonderful young poet and to share the evening with all of you, invisible as you may be. maybe appropriately, I'm starting with a poem called Vanishing Point. This is the first poem in the collection, Vanishing Point. If I go back to the place it begins, a black and white tom, trains rattling my crib. When I stand, I can see to where the tracks disappear. One day the cat is gone, gone they say, but somehow I know the sad bundle I see between the rails is what I have lost. And I bury the memory for 50 years, until my own dog goes missing. She is the last thing among last things, and I know she has been taken by the trains. For 7 miles, I walk the tracks, fingering the leather leash in my bag. The rails are higher than I imagined, the ties spaced wrong. I expected grass through flat fields, not these sharp stones, not steep embankments, not trains bearing down, hot metal, the ground shuddering, the whistles wait. Pain is a bargain with the gods, as if I can resurrect, as if that old dog could run the 20 miles, 30, 40, 90 miles to home, could follow the tracks, the smell of the trains, a whistle echoing what she heard in her sleep for so many years, as if that old dog could follow her love to me. I call her name across pastures and woods, backyards and empty lots. Picture her running to my voice, running toward me down the tracks. I can see to the horizon, to the place where the rails come together, almost out of sight. And she was fine. And she was fine. She was found. I always feel like I have to end that poem that way because it's too sad otherwise. So I want to explain the book title, Cauterized, because it's, I think, a kind of mystifying maybe title for a collection. It's a dramatic way of promoting healing, or at least of containing loss through burning or freezing a wound. And I see poetry, the writing of poetry, the reading of poetry, as one way of responding to wounds and to loss. And the poems that I've selected tonight sort of trace that through the collection. So I'll read next a poem that was written for my grown son. He has a desire to sail around the world, and I'm not in favor of that decision, but nobody's asking me. And that's really the point of the poem, the loss that all of us as parents experience as we let go of the children we love so dearly. It's a lifelong process. And this poem is about one such moment. Navigation. Before setting sail, he phones, says, "Mom, we have no ocean in us." Means the generations he has known have lived landlocked, far from water, forgetting the months he sailed my Saline, navel tethered, forgetting we are from a line of seafarers, Dutch traders, the Zuiderzee, Noordzee, Netherlands, Indië, our cargo, a history of mothers ceding sons to the sea. Forgetting that at 5 he loved dolphins, the ancients fish with a womb, studied their habits, breaches and depths, slaps, clicks and whistles, told me they transport drowning sailors to the surface, birth their young swimming, bond fiercely and long. And then, as Laurie mentioned, we all have been through the trauma of a pandemic. 4 years ago right now, I guess, was the start, when we were all trying to figure out what isolation and social distancing meant, and where we sustained more losses than any of us could have imagined over the years that followed. So this is a poem written in the throes of that first summer. It's called Why I Hate Living Alone. It is that kind of day, midsummer, hot and humid. Mornings, I open the house to the damp of river, pick sweet peas, feed kittens, water the black-eyed Susans, and the door, bang, 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 is tiresome. So I prop it open. It is that kind of day, and a small bird, brown and innocuous, a house finch perhaps, female, flies through the open door onto the porch. Window glass all around, and she is frantic, confused. The sky, the trees so brilliantly right there, her own wings beating wildly against, into, toward, into, against, toward what she knows, the world of oak, beech, poplar, hurtling from ledge to table to window to desk to window to ledge. The room is alive with her terror, and I am frozen by her frenzy until I hear over the panic, not this bird, but another, perched on the rail of the deck, reddish head thrown back, brimming with warble. A clarion summons, repeated, 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 as if he could sing her back into the sky. The next couple of poems are about the effects of organized religion and the ways those traumas sometimes show up later in our lives and need attention. This poem is about my childhood home, and it has a line from the catechism that I was raised on that you'll hear come into it partway through. The poem is called Third Avenue. In that house, it was always God. The painted brown cabinets, cornucopia wallpaper, gold and tan geometry of rugs. In that house, a Bible, worn covers, prayer and a piano with a hymnal, the radio playing God. In that house, it was always God, and I dusted the mop boards each Saturday in a living room no one used, no one. God was that house, trees dying of Dutch elm disease, peonies and hollyhocks, and my father's raised voice and my mother's raised hands, and all the ways I was required to confess, repent, forgive. A nest of wasps under the second-story eave, a leak in the cistern, mildew in the cellar where shelves were heavy with glass jars of green beans, applesauce, tomatoes, and pears. The Holy Ghost lived in the attic with the slanted roof, wandered in and out of my closets on sultry summer nights. What is your only comfort in life and death? A catechism I recited at the kitchen table, but I was sleepless with the worry I was going to hell. That wood-burning stove, my father split logs, my mother fed the flame. Together they cleaned soot from the chimney each fall. Bicycles and bloody knees, the pea gravel driveway, wire clothesline, spirea hedge. Summers I watched storms move in, tossing the trees, thought, Jesus is coming again. And the next poem is sort of a continuation of that. The ways that family history and generational trauma keep coming up and coming back. This is a story about my great aunt. It's a story I only heard as an adult. I didn't even know this person existed in the family. She died in a home abortion, and the poem is called Honor. It's for Grace, and the years of her life were June 5th, 1914, to December 26, 1935. Her brothers did it to save her good name because of the not bleeding, no monthly, did it at home, and after brought my grandmother, who cradled her in what had been their shared bed, her younger sister in a hemorrhage that left the mattress soaked, all that blood, because no doctor, because what would the neighbors, because family. I held her until her bleeding, her breathing stopped. From then on, my grandmother was lost. No Grace, who'd slept beside her, arm flung wide in sleep, fighting over covers, no whispered secrets, or sister tantrums, or borrowed hairbrush, or hand-me-down shoes. No sit beside at Sunday dinner, or walk to town. No someday come for coffee, hold the baby, recipes traded, peaches canned. And the brothers. Did they put on coveralls and boots, milk the cows, butcher chickens, bring in wood for their mother's cook stove as if nothing? And later say their prayers before bed, each inventing a story that would harden into silence, like a husk, a shell, a pebble-hard seed, until at last they could swallow it or they could spit. So here's another family story that was buried. This is actually about my own birth. And you'll hear at the end the unacknowledged trauma that takes place. Even though the poem is a little bit humorous about it all the way through, you'll also hear the undercurrents of a story not told and a trauma not acknowledged. The poem is called Twins. When I ask my father the story of my birth, he tells me about the car he was driving. And while it's not the story I'd hoped for, I listen. It's a start. Because what I want to know is the story not of me, but of my mother, and of the twin stillborn, and what it might have been like to have a sister, mirror image, the other half of every conversation I never had. The car was a '58 Plymouth, light green, with bench seats and a radio that only sometimes worked. He'd listened to ball games driving back and forth to school, and the Yanks were playing the Giants in the series that year. My mother was already at the hospital, a first but unexpected baby born dead, when he got the call. Only then did he know there had been, would never be, twins. But what he thought of as he drove to her was baseball, the new team he'd picked up on, the Twins. And no one spoke of my sister again. Until a decade later, when we moved to the Twin Cities, and I overheard someone say to my mother, "But Gladys, you had twins." And she said, "Yes." And I pestered her until she told. In those years, he took my younger brother and me out to see the games. Metropolitan Stadium, Hammer and Harmon and Rod Carew sat us in the cheap seats, insisted we wear our plastic mitts in case a fly ball was hit to deep center field. No ball ever was, but each summer I sat with my hand gloved, mitt ready, waiting. When you were born, people offered their condolences, my father concludes, and he laughs. So this is a little happier poem about my dad. This is a poem that's sort of in conversation with W.S. Merwin's poem Place, where he says, on the last day of the world, I would plant a tree. So this poem is called Rapture. The last day of the world will not find my father on his knees, where he has been for so many firsts and lasts and days between. Instead, he'll call me up. He'll read aloud the local obituaries, repeat a rabbi and priest joke he heard at morning coffee, tell me that Dante's Inferno was yesterday's answer to Final Jeopardy and he got it right. He'll tell me to be sure that the outdoor cats have enough food to get by, that the temp-controlled condo he sent for them is still plugged in. He'll inquire about the bat house, the salt lick, remind me to clean the fridge and leave out my vegetable scraps for the possums and raccoons. On the last day of the world, my father will wander back to stories about the girls he dated, his high school barbershop quartet, and the grocery store he managed the summer after my birth. Then he'll advise me to pick all my unripe tomatoes, arrange them on the windowsill in the sun, just in case. In the last moments of the last day of the world, my father will think of the cardinals, chickadees, hummingbirds, jays. Are all the feeders filled, he'll ask. You don't want to be someone who is unfaithful to the birds. Then one thing that runs through the whole book is, of course, my greatest wounding and loss, and that is the loss of my daughter, Hannah. 7 years ago this month, it's hard to believe 7 years have passed, but 7 years ago this month, Hannah was lost to suicide. And I wrote a book, A Fine Yellow Dust, about that first year, poems that trace that first grieving year. But these are the poems that follow that, and it's part of why the collection is titled Cauterized, because it talks about both the necessity and the impossibility of healing from some kinds of loss. This poem is called Sowing with Salt. Ocean brine, seawater, salt of the earth. What is the cost for a mother looking back? Salt flats, salt fields. I carry with me her handwritten notes and piercings. Hey Mama Bear voicemails I will never delete. Salt mines, salt lick, salting the soil. For a time I wished only to become her, shampoo and clothes, my skin, my hair, the scent of her, myself, herself, sewing a daughter's name, brimstone on my tongue. All of me the wound, all of me salt. This poem is called But Winter. And Julia, it has deer in it. So we're already in conversation. But winter. The tree drops apples, soft thuds through the night. And each morning in the late August dappling, the deer are gathered, eating up sweet bruised autumn. This morning too, but nearer the house, a doe and a yearling nuzzle, the doe slow licking the fawn, face, ears, neck. From the window, I am not amazed at the doe. What catches my breath is the fawn, so still, her raised head turning toward, leaning in, a primal yes. We live on a moving edge, under stars that have long ago gone out. I still turn toward a blonde flash in a crowd. The dog rouses expectantly at a dead girl's name. This season, for a moment, it holds promise, a doe, a fawn, but winter, always winter on the way. And then this is really, I think, probably the only one of the only poems that I wrote to Hannah. So it's about a conversation she and I had one Christmas when she was home from college. It's called In Time. After her death, my mother came back as an eagle. I saw her often. You saw her too. Once, home from college, childhood ornaments arranged on the family tree, you stood at the window gazing out at the river when, Look, a dark shape flew close, turned into the wind. When the sky went slate empty again, you said, that's how I'll always see Grandma. And you asked, how do you think we'll see Grandpa? And later, I will see you in everything. I knew then that when someday I came to you, you would know me, and it made me glad, the ordinals of loss and my sure return forever to you. I never wondered how you might return to me. My daughter, now sea turtle, hummingbird, monarch, now yellow-eyed heron at the river's edge, rare and relentlessly still. Look, what memory water, what memory sky. And then this is the last of this set. They get better after this. This is a poem that, as I was saying, really is about the impossibility and the necessity of moving on. The poem is called Cradle Song. And then came piecing myself back together. Gardens I tended that did not say no, tides that brought gifts. There are words for offspring, fledgling, cygnet, kitten, cub. What made me think I could name her? She, fully formed, toenails, elbows, lashes, and lungs, already a hole in her heart. She could finish my stories, tell it in my ear, Mommy, could predict what followed, each next line. You made it, she said, never affirmation, only accusation, the star, the shelf, the melody falling. She wanted to be like me, be not me, always a note I could not rise above, can never refuse. Sing, Mommy, sing. And then 2 more poems. This coming Sunday, April 7th, marks 30 years since the start of the genocide against the Tutsi of Rwanda. Annie spent time in Rwanda. I also spent time in Rwanda working with survivors for many years, starting quite a time after the genocide, though. And in the time that I spent in Rwanda, I made deep connections with individuals that have stayed part of my life. I've gone back to see them, and we stay in contact. One of those people is a young woman named Louise, who was 12 at the time of genocide, and who I've had a chance to visit over the years. This is a poem about her first child, Avi, when Avi was born, and I had a chance to meet Avi. The poem is called Rwanda, 20 Years On, but that's a little poetic license because 20 seemed like a good word to put in there. It's really somewhere between 20 and 30 years, and now, of course, it's 30 years on. What you need to know is that in Rwanda, a metal roof is a sign of security and prosperity. So knowing that, you'll understand where the poem ends. Rwanda, 20 years on for Louise. At the end of the 2-decade road is a house, tin roof, stone fence, windows still wanting for glass, and yes, the house is a house, and yes, the storm clouds are clouds, and yes, the cradled child is a child. Miracle, the haze of his hair, miracle, the scent of his skin. 2 decades ago, his mother hid in the swamps for weeks, orphan teeth loosening, budding breasts shriveled against hunger's ribs. 2 decades ago, she alone carried the future. Her great-grandmother's voice, her twin brother's smiles, through bloodied days, through panic nights. There is nothing, she says, nothing that can touch me now. Her hand on the curve of the baby's, her baby's back. And I take it in, the miracle hair, the rutted road with the mud-red drive, the roof in the rainstorm, such bright wings. And then finally, a closing poem. This poem uses the word umbra. The title is Umbra, which means shadow. And I'm closing with it because I think that all our losses remain scars and shadows that we carry in our physical selves. In this case, the vehicle, our hands, the part of the body that's carrying is our hands. And the head note plays with the notion of umbra. It says, it's by the poet Siv Cedering, and it says, "When I sleep, the shadows of my hands come to me, because I wear the rings of the dead, because the veins are my mother line, heat so blue, because awake each hand is a fish, and in dreams each a bird, hollow twinning of bones, because Liszt lives in the reach, Vivaldi in motion, the trout quintet rippling across strings, because I was forced to fold hands and pray, because splinters work their way out, because I am quick with the needle, tenacious with the black unbreakable thread, because there are scars and I forgive them, because long ago, from his seat in the back, my toddler son said, "Mom, you have beautiful hands." Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'd like to open it up for a few minutes of Q&A with Laura. We have probably 5 to 10 minutes before we ought to head upstairs. Oh, great. Who would like to open the Q&A? Who has a question for Laura? Surely someone would like to know something. Yes.
When did you first know a writer? What experiences led to that? When did you first know you were a writer?
Can everybody hear me? I don't need a microphone, right? Do I need a microphone?
I don't know. Here, well, we could do this.
Okay. It's a little embarrassing, but I had lots of conversations with myself walking to and from school when I was a kid, and I made up many, many poems along the way. And then when I got home, I would write them down, and I think my first poem began, "The purple sunset, the silver moon, the stars are coming so soon, so soon. Though it is cold, I'm warm inside, and I like it outside, outside." So I really sort of had the idea that if you needed a few more syllables, you could just do the same thing. But when my grandmother died, she had that poem in her dresser drawer, so it hung around for longer than probably it should have. But.
How did your process for editing go for your new edition?
I actually love editing. Probably no one wants to hear that. I see poets nod and everyone else being like, nah. But I actually really like editing. And I have the great gift of many poets in my life who are willing to read drafts and give feedback. It's not always feedback I want. Sometimes I'm like, no, no, no. And then a little while later I think, ooh, I think they might be right. But it's a gift to have people who will read and talk about your work, and I have many of them. And many of them are here. Thank you.
I actually have a question that I could have mentioned in the intro, but I could have gone on in the intro. You were part of the process of editing the volume for My Secret Lansing, wherein folks from the community shared stories of places in Lansing, whether they were stories, whether they were poems. I was fortunate enough to have you rework my work. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that particular project and what that entailed and what you enjoyed or maybe didn't quite enjoy about it.
Well, first let me give a shout out to the co-editor, Rulaine Stokes here, and to our design person, Julie Taylor, up next to Anita there. It was, and then many of the people in this room were facilitators of workshops where poetry and prose pieces were generated, and many people in this room had pieces in that collection. So it was the hardest thing about it, and I know Rulaine will agree with me, was the pace. It was a lot faster to get it out than we thought it was going to be, and a lot more work. But so for a little while there, Rulaine and I were talking many times a day, and I spent as much time with Rulaine at my house as I did alone. But it was really wonderful to get to see the community through the eyes of the many writers who were represented in the collection, and to move the pieces around so that they were in conversation with each other. And the many times that we laid things out and said, that doesn't feel quite right, doesn't quite feel right yet. And then when we felt like we had it, there was just something that was in place for it. And it was really a wonderful process that way. Do you want to say anything else, Rulaine? Yeah.
Yeah, Laura, I have a question, I guess. It's not as much a question as I would like your response to this. The current editor of Poetry magazine says, among other things, it's the responsibility of the poet to fill the world with song. And listening to you read, you're doing it. And I just wonder what you would say about that. How, there are many kinds of songs and many different kinds of poets, but what do you think about that idea that it's the responsibility of the poet to fill the world with song?
Yikes. If this were a job interview, I would say, what do you think, Anita? Well, I think poets and everyone else, but poets because of the ways that language can be distilled and the ways that emotion shows up, not in necessarily statements, but in images and in craft, in the ways that lines move and the ways that a reader or a speaker can go through the poem with breath, with breathing. All of those things, I think, come together in ways that can make even hard things, even sad things, even trauma, into something that speaks to other people, that connects to other people, and in that way can be beautiful. So I guess that's what I would say about song. And I know that at this moment in poetic history, there are a lot of poets who are suddenly writing collections that are actually about delight and about comfort. And I think it's a little bit of trying to both acknowledge what is so difficult about the world that we live in right now on so many fronts, but also to find the beautiful moments in it, and to be able to convey those and share those as well.
I'm wondering if you have always known that you wanted to teach, or like when did you realize that you wanted to teach and share your craft with everybody?
What a great question from a former student. The truth is, the thing I knew I never ever wanted to do was teach. Like, it was the one thing I never wanted to do. My dad was a professor, and even though when I was little, I underlined in my little baby books are full of, my little golden books are full of underlining, because I thought that's what you do. If you have a book, you have to underline what's important. So I just went through and did that. So maybe I was more on a path to be, I don't know, a scholar or a critic or something. But eventually, I think, what did you say today, Rulaine? What did you say that Recky said? Teaching?
Oh, teaching is one of the few professions that permits love.
So did you hear that? Teaching is one of the few professions that permits love. And that seems like the best reason for somebody to be a teacher.
We have time for, at least one more. There we go. Thank you.
So I don't know how many people in here are poets or aren't poets. A couple of us in this, right? I mean, like, that's not what we study. And you talk about how poetry has been like a mode of healing for you and how you've helped other people heal. So people who are new to poetry or new to using writing as healing, like, what advice would you give them to start that journey, and how should they start that journey?
Wow. I think that what writing allows us to do is, for one thing, to be honest, right? We may or may not have an audience for it, but it allows for honesty. And I would say that it takes a lot of courage then to write as a way of facilitating healing. And that's what I mostly felt with the Rwandans that I worked with, the amazing courage that they had. But writing also lets us step back from the experience, move things around, leave it and come back, view it from a different perspective. So there are many aspects of writing that are, documented as therapeutic and as facilitating healing. So I would say that for people who are just starting out, there are a lot of good books about it that help guide writers into the work of healing through writing. But it's also something that's a practice, right? So doing it and giving yourself permission to leave it and to come back to it and do with it whatever you want. Burn it or share it, revise it, any of those things. bottom drawer.
With no further questions, let's have another round for Laura. And another round for Julia.